Before these stories begin, listen carefully. These are not the kind of horror stories you forget in the morning. They don't rely on monsters, screams, or shock. They're about real places, late-night stops, gas stations, rest areas, the kind you only notice when everything feels too quiet. This channel is called Midnight Whispers Stories. It exists for one reason: to document the moments people never talk about, but never forget. If you listen to stories at night, if silence makes you uneasy, if this already feels familiar, subscribe now. Because every story here is part of something larger. Story 1. Gas station that felt closed. The lights were on, but nothing inside moved. Standing there felt like interrupting something that had already decided to end. I pulled off Interstate 40 somewhere between Amarillo and Albuquerque at 3 in the morning because my fuel gauge was kissing empty and my eyelids were doing the same. The desert highway had been swallowing my headlights for hours, nothing but darkness and the occasional rabbit frozen in the beams. When I saw the glow of that gas station rising from the black like a beacon, relief washed over me. But relief has a way of rotting fast when something is wrong. And something about this place was very, very wrong. The station sat alone in an ocean of sand and scrub brush. No town nearby, no other buildings, just this bright island of fluorescent light bleeding into the night. The pumps looked modern enough, digital screens glowing blue. But as I climbed out of my truck, the silence hit me like a physical thing. No highway noise, no wind, nothing, just my boots on the concrete and my own breathing, too loud in my ears. The convenience store windows were illuminated, those harsh white lights that make everything look sterile and cold. I could see shelves inside, rows of chips and candy bars, a coffee station in the back. But I could not see a single person. Not behind the counter, not restocking shelves, not cleaning. The place looked frozen, like someone had pressed pause on a video. I started pumping gas and kept my eyes on those windows. The numbers on the pump climbed slowly, gallons ticking up, and my skin prickled despite the warm desert air. Every instinct I had was screaming that I should get back in my truck and drive until I found another station, even if it meant running on fumes. But fear makes you stupid sometimes. Fear makes you tell yourself stories about why everything is fine. Maybe the attendant was in the bathroom. Maybe they were in a back office. Maybe I was just tired and paranoid from driving all night. The pump clicked off. $42.18. I looked at the store again, really looked, and noticed something that made my stomach drop. The door was propped open. Just a few inches, but enough to see that it was not locked, not closed, not protecting whatever was inside from whatever was outside. A door left open in the middle of the desert night. An invitation or a warning. I could not tell which. I should have driven away. That thought keeps me awake now, months later, lying in bed and staring at my ceiling. I should have lost those $42.18 and counted myself lucky. But I walked toward that open door instead, and every step felt like wading through something thick and wrong. The door handle was cold, colder than it should have been. I pulled it wider and stepped inside, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not rot, not death, but something else. Something chemical and sweet, like air freshener trying too hard to cover up something terrible. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that familiar buzz that normally fades into background noise but here sounded deafening. Everything was in perfect order. The shelves were stocked and faced, labels turned outward like soldiers at attention. The floor gleamed like it had just been mopped. The coffee station had fresh pots brewing, steam rising from the dark liquid inside. But there was no one, no movement, no sound except that horrible humming and my footsteps on the linoleum. I called out. My voice sounded small and swallowed, like the store was eating the sound before it could travel. No answer. I walked toward the counter, my reflection sliding across the scratched plexiglass barrier that separated customers from the register area. Behind it, everything looked normal. A stool where someone should be sitting. A computer screen glowing with a screensaver, those flying toasters bouncing around. A cigarette display locked behind metal shutters. A lottery ticket dispenser. All the pieces were there, but the person who made it a real place was missing. That is when I saw the logbook. It was sitting open on the counter, and I should not have looked at it, should not have touched it, but my hand reached for it anyway. The pages were filled with entries, times and initials, the record of a normal night shift. The last entry was from 11:37, just 3.5 hours ago. Someone named DM had written it in careful block letters. Everything looked routine until I read what they had written in the notes section. It is back. Closing up. Do not follow. My hand started shaking. I put the logbook down carefully, like it might explode if I moved too fast. The humming of the lights seemed louder now, almost like words I could not quite make out. I backed away from the counter, and that is when I noticed the back hallway. There was a door back there, one of those plain metal things that lead to storage rooms or offices or places customers are not supposed to go. It was open too, not propped like the front door, but standing wide like a mouth. Darkness poured out of that hallway. Not the normal darkness of an unlit room, but something thicker, something that seemed to push against the fluorescent light trying to reach it. And from inside that darkness came a sound. Low, rhythmic, like breathing, but too deep, too slow, coming from lungs that were far too large. I turned and ran, not walked, not hurried, but ran like a child running from monsters under the bed. My boots slipped on the too clean floor and I almost went down, caught myself on a chip display that rattled and swayed. I burst through the front door and the night air hit my face, and I have never been more grateful for darkness in my life. My truck sat there under the canopy lights, patient and real and normal. I was fumbling for my keys when I heard it, the sound of that door behind me, the metal one in the back hallway, slamming shut. The crash echoed across the empty desert, impossibly loud. I did not look back. I got in my truck, cranked the engine, and my tires screamed on the pavement as I pulled away from those pumps. But I did look in my rearview mirror. Just once, just for a second. The gas station was still there, lights blazing, door still propped open. And standing in the window, backlit by that harsh fluorescent glow, was a shape. Tall, too tall, with shoulders that were too wide and a head that tilted at an angle that human necks do not bend. It was watching me leave. I drove for 2 hours straight before I stopped again, and when I did, it was at a busy truck stop with dozens of people and noise and life. I sat in my truck shaking, drinking bad coffee, waiting for the sun to come up. When it finally did, I pulled up the map on my phone and tried to find that gas station. I knew exactly where it should be, could retrace my route perfectly. But according to the map, there was nothing there. No gas station, no rest stop, no services for 60 miles in another direction. I called the highway patrol anyway, told them there was an abandoned gas station that should be checked out, that something was wrong there. The dispatcher was patient, asked me for the exact location. I gave her the mile marker, described the area. She put me on hold. When she came back, her voice had changed, gone careful and quiet. She told me there used to be a gas station there 20 years ago, but it burned down in a fire that killed the night attendant. They never rebuilt. The owner sold the land and moved away. According to her, according to every official record, that station has been gone for 2 decades. Just an empty lot now where the desert took back what was always supposed to be desert. But I was there. I pumped $42.18 of gas into my truck. I walked into that store. I saw those shelves and that coffee and that logbook with an entry from 3 hours before I arrived. I heard something breathing in that back hallway, something that was not human and was not supposed to exist. The charge showed up on my credit card statement 2 weeks later. Gas purchase, that exact amount, time-stamped at 3:14 in the morning. The merchant name was just a string of numbers and symbols that my bank could not identify. When I called to dispute it, to ask what it meant, they told me the transaction was valid and closed the case. The gas was real, the place was real, which means whatever I saw standing in that window was real too. I do not drive that highway anymore. I take the long way around, add hours to my trips, pay extra in fuel costs. Because late at night when I close my eyes, I can still see that shape in the window. Still hear that breathing from the darkness. Still feel the wrongness of that place, the way it felt like interrupting something ancient and patient and hungry. And sometimes I wonder about DM, whoever they were, whatever happened to them when they decided to close up and not follow. I wonder if they made it out. I wonder if anyone does. Or if that gas station is still there in some way I cannot understand. Lights on, door propped open, waiting for the next person who needs fuel badly enough to ignore every screaming instinct telling them to drive away. The lights were on, but nothing inside moved. And now I know why. Because whatever was really inside did not need to move. It just needed to wait. And it is very, very good at waiting. Story 2. Rest area. A confessional. Have you ever noticed how the silence on a highway can feel wrong? Like something is waiting in the quiet? That is what I'm about to tell you. This happened to me 3 years ago, and I have never spoken about it until now. My name is Michael, and I want to be honest about what occurred during those 23 hours I spent at a rest area in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. What I experienced was not just scary or unsettling. It was something that revealed a horrifying truth about how little we actually understand about the places we pass through every single day. I was driving home from Colorado on Interstate 80, heading east toward Iowa. The highway stretched endlessly in both directions, and I had been behind the wheel for almost 8 hours. My eyes were burning. My neck ached. The radio had become just background noise to my exhausted mind. I needed to stop, to walk around, to feel solid ground beneath my feet again. That is when I saw the sign. Rest area 2 miles. Last services for 50 miles. It was nearly 11 at night when I pulled in. The parking lot was perfectly empty. Even the silence felt maintained, like it had been waiting. I remember thinking that was a strange thought to have. Why would silence wait for anything? But that is how it felt, and I cannot describe it any other way. The rest area itself was a standard concrete building with 2 wings. One side housed bathrooms and water fountains. The other side had vending machines and a small seating area with hard plastic chairs. A few parking spaces lined the front, then a larger section stretched around back. All of it was deserted. The kind of deserted that feels intentional. I parked my truck near the entrance and sat for a moment before getting out. There were no other vehicles. Not a single car, just the building, the parking lot, and the darkness that pressed in from every direction beyond the pale yellow lights mounted on the poles. I remember looking at my phone. No signal. Not one bar. In this modern age. In 2021, I was standing in a place with no cell service whatsoever, and somehow that detail made everything feel more eerie and unsettling. I used the bathroom first. The fluorescent lights hummed with that particular creepy hum that all rest area lights seem to make. The mirrors were the kind that distort your reflection slightly, which I have never understood. Why would anyone want that? When I looked at myself, my face seemed drawn, almost skeletal from the long drive. The shadows under my eyes appeared deeper than they should have been. The bathroom smelled clean, sterile, with that chemical undertone that never quite masks something else underneath. When I came out, I walked over to the vending machines and got a coffee that tasted like burned plastic and regret. I sat in one of those horrible plastic chairs and drank it anyway, staring out the small window at my truck and the empty parking lot beyond. That is when I noticed something wrong. No, not noticed, felt. The building was humming. Not just the lights. The whole structure seemed to be vibrating at a frequency just below what you could consciously hear. You felt it in your bones. You felt it in your teeth. I stood up, and the sensation became even more obvious. The creepy, terrifying vibration seemed to pulse from somewhere beneath the building. I walked back outside. The night air was cold and absolutely still. There was no wind, not even a breeze. The darkness extended forever in every direction except where the parking lot lights created these small islands of illumination. I stood there, feeling small and exposed and ridiculous all at the same time. Then I heard something, a sound that was not quite a sound. It came from somewhere to my right, from the darkness beyond the parking lot. It was like the whisper of tires on wet pavement, or maybe wind through trees, except there were no trees here. This was flat Nebraska prairie land, endless and empty. I told myself I was exhausted. I told myself my brain was playing tricks on me. Fear works like that. It feeds on emptiness and fatigue. I got back in my truck, locked the doors, and sat there for a while. The engine was off. I just sat in the darkness, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. Definitely the sound of tires. Definitely a vehicle moving slowly across gravel. I felt my heartbeat accelerate. I started the truck. The engine roared to life, and the headlights blazed across the parking lot, illuminating nothing but pavement and marked spaces. I drove around to the other side of the building, looking for the source of the sound. The back lot was completely empty. Whatever I had heard was gone, or had never been there at all. I sat there for another hour, telling myself I would leave, but something made me stay. Not want, made me. The force was not external. It was something inside my own mind. An instinct, the kind of deep survival instinct that animals must feel when they sense danger approaching. Finally, around 1 a.m, I decided that continuing to drive in my exhausted state was more dangerous than sleeping in my truck for a few hours. I locked all the doors, reclined the seat, and tried to rest, but I could not sleep. The vibration from the building was stronger now. I could feel it through the frame of the truck, and there were more sounds. Multiple sounds now. Tires on gravel, voices that were not quite voices. The sound of something heavy being moved. The sound of a door opening and closing over and over again. I kept telling myself nobody was here. The parking lot was empty. I had checked multiple times, but the fear, the terrifying, creeping certainty that I was being watched, would not leave me. It sat in the darkness with me like a physical presence. Around 3 in the morning, I saw something that still haunts me. In my side mirror, a figure appeared in the parking lot. Just standing there, absolutely still. I could not make out details. The lighting was too poor, but the shape was unmistakably human, motionless, watching my truck. I sat up so fast that I hit my head on the steering wheel. When I looked again, the figure was gone. There was nothing there but empty pavement and the parking lot lights casting their pale yellow glow on nothing. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of exhaustion and fear in the strange shadows that parking lot lights create. But my hands were shaking. My mouth was dry. Every single instinct I possessed was screaming at me to get out of there. To drive. To leave this place behind. So I did. I started the truck and drove. I drove for 3 hours straight, until the sun came up, until I reached the next town with lights and cars and other people. My hands shook for the entire drive. When I finally stopped at a real town, a place with restaurants and gas stations and civilization, I felt like I could breathe again. I bought breakfast. I used a bathroom that was connected to a regular building with other people in it. I sat in a diner and ate eggs and toast and tried to convince myself that what I had experienced was just a combination of exhaustion and imagination. But there was something I could not shake. That day, after I had rested and eaten, I did something I had not done in the actual moment. I did an internet search for that rest area, for the facilities there, for any information about that specific location. What I found was chilling. The rest area had been closed for repairs 3 months before I stopped there. 3 months. The state had shut it down entirely due to what the official statement called structural concerns. The building was not supposed to be occupied. The parking lot was not supposed to be in use. I read forum posts from other travelers. Post after post from people who said they had experienced the same things I had. The empty parking lot, the vibration from beneath the building, the sounds in the darkness, the figures that appeared and vanished. Most disturbing was a post from a highway patrol officer who mentioned that the rest area had been built on the site of a former mass grave from the 1950s. A place where a hospital for the criminally insane had burned down. The official story was that it was an accident, but the officer was hinting that there was more to it, that there had been an investigation, that certain things had been covered up. I never returned to that place. I never even drove past it again. I changed my route now. It adds 4 hours to my trip, but I cannot bring myself to drive that stretch of Interstate 80 anymore. The horrifying part, the truly unsettling and nightmare-inducing realization, is this: I started researching other rest areas. Other abandoned places along American highways. Places that look normal and empty but feel wrong. And I found hundreds of accounts. Thousands. Travelers describing the exact same experiences. The vibrations, the sounds, the figures. These places are not haunted in the traditional sense. There are no ghosts or supernatural phenomena that defy explanation. What is happening is far more disturbing and eerie. These locations are triggering something deep in the human brain. A response to trauma, to violence, to suffering that has soaked into the ground itself. Some places, if enough terrible things happen in them, they change. They become terrifying in a way that goes beyond rational fear. They press down on your mind. They make your instincts scream at you to run. And the most horrifying part is that we build rest areas and gas stations and hotels on top of these cursed locations all the time. You have probably stopped at one. You have probably felt that creepy, unsettling sensation without understanding why. You dismissed it as exhaustion or your imagination. But what if you were sensing something real? Something that thousands of other people have sensed in the same locations? That is what keeps me awake now. The knowledge that these places exist. That they are everywhere, hiding in plain sight along the highways we drive every day. And the terrifying possibility that the next rest area you stop at, the next gas station where you buy coffee at 3 in the morning, might be one of them. Might be waiting for you in the darkness. Might be watching. The parking lot was perfectly empty. Even the silence felt maintained, like it had been waiting. And now I understand that it was waiting. It had been waiting for me. It will wait for someone else next time. A lonely traveler on a dark highway. A weary driver who makes the mistake of stopping at the wrong location at the wrong time. Do not dismiss the unsettling and eerie feelings you get in certain places. That vibration in your bones. That sense that something is deeply wrong. That is not imagination. That is your brain recognizing danger that your rational mind cannot explain. I drove away from that rest area alive. But part of me never left that parking lot. Part of me is still sitting there in the darkness. Still feeling watched. Still hearing those sounds in the night. And the most horrifying realization of all is this: I am not the only one. If these stories feel familiar, there's a reason. They're not meant to shock you. They're meant to stay with you. Midnight Whispers Stories isn't about monsters or sudden scares. It's about places you've been to, stops you've made, nights that felt quiet, but not safe. This channel is built as a series. Every video goes deeper into isolation, silence, and the moments people don't talk about. Subscribe now, because if you recognize this feeling, you're already part of the story. Story 3. Bathroom door was already open. The bathroom door was already open when I pulled into the rest stop at 3 in the morning, and that single detail would not stop screaming inside my head. I had been driving for 11 hours straight across the Nevada desert, hauling a load of auto parts from Reno to Phoenix, and my bladder felt like it might burst. The rest area sat alone on a stretch of Highway 95 where nothing else existed for 40 miles in either direction. Just darkness, creeping desert wind, and that single concrete building with the bathrooms inside. The light inside was on before anyone went in. I noticed it immediately as I stepped out of my rig, the harsh fluorescent glow spilling onto the cracked pavement like something alive and waiting. Every other rest stop I had ever visited kept the lights on motion sensors to save energy. But this one burned bright and constant, even though my truck was the only vehicle in the entire parking lot. The wind carried a smell I could not identify, something between old meat and chemical cleaner, something that made my throat tighten. No sound came from behind the door, not the hum of ventilation, not the drip of a leaking faucet, not even the buzz of those fluorescent tubes overhead. Complete silence hung in that doorway like a held breath. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, fighting the urge in my bladder against the creeping fear crawling up my spine. The smart move would have been getting back in my truck and driving until I found another stop, but I was so tired, so desperate, and the next rest area was nearly an hour away. I stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind me without a sound. The bathroom was pristine, too pristine. The tile floors gleamed like they had been scrubbed minutes ago, reflecting the harsh overhead lights in perfect white squares. 3 sinks lined one wall, their chrome fixtures spotless and gleaming. 4 stall doors stood closed on the opposite side, dark green metal that looked military surplus, each one perfectly aligned. But something felt wrong about the whole space, something my mind could not quite grasp. The air smelled too clean, like bleach mixed with something floral and artificial, and underneath it all, that same rotting meat odor I had noticed outside. I walked to the urinal, unzipped, and tried to ignore the creeping sensation between my shoulder blades. The kind of feeling you get when someone watches you, when predator eyes track your movements from the shadows. I finished as quickly as possible and moved to the sinks to wash my hands. The water ran ice cold, so cold it hurt, and when I looked up into the mirror, I saw something that made my heart slam against my ribs. All 4 stall doors behind me stood open now. Every single one. I had not heard them move, had not heard hinges creak or latches click. They simply hung there, yawning wide like dark mouths, and I knew with absolute certainty they had been closed when I walked in. My hands froze under the running water as I stared at those open doors in the mirror, afraid to turn around, afraid of what I might see if I looked directly at them. The fluorescent lights began to flicker, not the normal buzz and flutter of old tubes dying, but a deliberate pattern, almost like Morse code, like something trying to communicate. Dark, light, dark, dark, light. Over and over, the temperature in the bathroom dropped 20 degrees in the span of 3 seconds. My breath suddenly visible in the air, frost forming on the edges of the mirrors. I spun around to face the stalls. They were closed again, all 4 doors shut tight, lined up in perfect order, exactly as they had been when I first entered. But I knew what I had seen in that mirror. I knew those doors had been opened just moments before. Something scraped behind the second stall door from the left. Metal on tile, slow and deliberate, like fingernails dragging across the floor. Then silence again, heavy and waiting. My entire body screamed at me to run, to get out of that bathroom and never look back, but my feet would not move. I stood frozen, staring at that green metal door, watching for any sign of movement. The door began to open, slowly, inch by inch, revealing nothing but darkness inside, a shadow so complete it seemed to absorb the light around it. No toilet visible, no walls, just that impossible black void growing wider as the door swung outward. The scratching sound came again, closer now, accompanied by something that might have been breathing, wet and ragged and wrong. I finally broke free of my paralysis and bolted for the exit. My shoes squeaked on the 2 clean tiles as I ran, and behind me I heard all 4 stall doors slam open in unison, crashing against the walls with enough force to crack the tile. I did not look back. I hit the bathroom door at full speed, shouldered it open, and stumbled out into the night air. My truck sat exactly where I had left it, engine still running, headlights cutting through the desert darkness. I ran to the driver's side door, yanked it open, and hauled myself inside, slamming the locks down the moment I was safe inside the cab. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. That is when I saw her standing in the bathroom doorway. A woman in a white dress, her hair long and dark and hanging over her face. She stood perfectly still in that rectangle of harsh light, not moving, not breathing, just standing there facing my truck. I could not see her features through the curtain of hair, but I knew she was looking at me. Every cell in my body knew it. I threw the truck into gear and peeled out of that rest stop, tires screeching on the pavement, gravel spraying behind me. I drove for 3 miles before I had the courage to check my mirrors. The rest stop had vanished, swallowed by darkness, as if it had never existed at all. But here's the part that keeps me awake at night, the detail that haunts my nightmares and makes me question everything I think I know about reality. When I got to Phoenix 12 hours later, I unloaded my cargo and headed into the truck stop to grab some coffee and food. I went to use the bathroom, pushing open the door without thinking, and I froze in the doorway. The bathroom was identical, same pristine white tiles, same spotless chrome fixtures, same 4 green metal stall doors lined up along the wall. The same chemical floral smell masking something rotten underneath. The same fluorescent lights burning with that harsh, constant glow. The same bathroom, hundreds of miles from where I had been, in a completely different building, in a different city. I backed out slowly and asked the clerk at the counter how long this truck stop had been here. She looked at me like I was crazy and said it was brand new, opened just 2 weeks ago. Then she asked me if I was feeling okay, if maybe I needed to sit down for a minute. I told her I was fine and walked back to my truck on legs that felt like water. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I have seen that bathroom 17 more times. Different rest stops, different truck stops, different cities across Nevada, Arizona, California, and Utah. Always the same layout, always that same terrifying perfection, always with the door already open and the light on before anyone goes in. I have started asking other drivers if they have seen it too. Most look at me like I have lost my mind from too many hours on the road. But 3 drivers, their faces went pale when I described it. One guy grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises and told me to stop looking for it, to ignore it when I see it, to hold my bladder until I find somewhere else. He said his cousin used to drive these routes. Used to, past tense. They found his truck abandoned at a rest stop outside Barstow 2 years ago, engine still running, driver door wide open, no sign of struggle. Security cameras showed him walking into the bathroom at 3 in the morning and never coming back out. When the police checked the building, they found it completely empty. No sign of him anywhere, but they did find something scratched into the paint on the inside of one of the stall doors. 3 words, carved deep into the metal with something sharp. 3 words that make my blood run cold every time I think about them. The door was open. I do not know what that bathroom is or why it keeps appearing on my routes. I do not know what stands in that doorway watching drivers pull away in the night. I do not know where it takes people or what happens to them inside those stalls with their impossible darkness. What I do know is that I have started carrying a bucket in my truck. I do not care how desperate I get, how badly I need to stop, how much my bladder screams for relief. I will never walk through that doorway again. I will never step inside that pristine, horrifying space where the bathroom door is already open and the light burns on before anyone goes in. Because last week, I saw my own truck in the parking lot. Same make, same model, same license plate, parked in the exact spot where I always park. I watched from the highway as I drove past, and I saw myself walking toward that bathroom door in the distance, saw my own figure step inside and disappear. I am still driving, still making my routes, still hauling cargo across the desert. But I know now that somewhere out there, in some version of reality I do not understand, I never made it out of that rest stop. Some version of me is still inside, trapped in that bathroom where doors open and close on their own, where darkness waits behind green metal, where the scratching never stops. And the worst part, the detail that wakes me up screaming every night, is knowing that eventually, one of these times when I see that bathroom, I am going to be too tired to resist. I am going to convince myself it was all in my head, just exhaustion and paranoia from too many hours on the road. I am going to park my truck and walk inside, and the door will close behind me without a sound. And I will finally understand what waits in that terrible, pristine silence. The bathroom door is already open. The light is always on. And sooner or later, we all have to go inside. Story 4. Vending machine. I found a phone in my car that does not belong to me, and it has been calling the same number for 3 days straight. That terrifying simple fact is how this nightmare started. Not with a car accident or a break-in. Not with something obvious. Just a phone. Just a buzzing, vibrating phone that appeared on my front seat sometime between when I left the grocery store and when I walked out to my driveway that evening. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No scratches on the lock. The doors were still locked when I discovered it. My name is David. I am 48 years old. I work in insurance claims in Des Moines, Iowa. I have a house, a mortgage, a wife, and 2 kids in college. I have never been one of those people who believes in conspiracy theories or ghosts or anything that cannot be explained by physics and logic. But what happened over the next 72 hours changed everything I thought I knew about reality. The phone itself was a cheap burner. One of those disposable models you can buy at any convenience store across America. The screen was cracked in the lower corner. The battery was dying. When I held it up to my ear that first time, I could hear dial tones. Long, hollow dial tones. Then silence. Then a voice asking me to leave a message. A generic automated voice. Nothing scary about it. Nothing that should have terrified me the way it did. But here's what made my skin crawl. The call log showed 143 outgoing calls to the same number over the course of 2 days. 143 calls. Each one lasting between 4 and 7 seconds. Like someone was hanging up the moment the call connected. Like someone was trying desperately to reach that number and failing again and again. I do not know why I did not call the police immediately. Maybe because I told myself there was a rational explanation. Maybe I was afraid of sounding crazy. Maybe some part of me, some instinct buried deep in my brain, knew that involving the authorities would make things worse. Instead, I did the dumbest thing possible. I called the number back. The line clicked. No ringing, just an immediate click like someone was waiting for me to call. Then that same automated voice. Then nothing. The chilling realization hit me that I was not calling a person. I was calling a dead line. A disconnected number. A void. That night, I could not sleep. My wife Sarah noticed something was wrong, but I told her I was just stressed about work. She accepted that lie because that is what long marriages do. They accept comfortable lies. I sat in my basement office and researched the number obsessively. Nothing came up. No business listed. No person associated with it. Just a phone number that existed in some strange empty space between the living and the forgotten. By the second day, the phone had started calling out again by itself. I would wake up and find missed calls. The screen would light up in the darkness of my bedroom. No password protection. No lock screen. Just constantly trying to reach that same disconnected number like a ghost screaming into an empty telephone line. I made a mistake on the second evening. I decided to follow the calls. I used the GPS on my car to track the signal from my cell phone, its location services. I know now how incredibly foolish that was. But in that moment, with my hands shaking and my heart pounding against my ribs, I felt like I had no choice. The calls had taken on a rhythm, a pattern, and patterns mean something. Patterns mean intention. The GPS led me to Interstate 80, heading east toward the Nebraska border. I drove for 2 hours, and the phone kept ringing. 2 hours of highway stretching endlessly before me. 2 hours of flat Iowa landscape with nothing but occasional scattered lights in distant farmhouses. By the time I realized I should turn back, I was already too committed. Already too afraid of what might happen if I did not see this through. The exit it directed me toward was barely marked. Route 238. A rural county road that went nowhere important. Nothing but cornfields and darkness and that creeping sensation that I had made a horrible mistake. The road twisted and turned, and eventually I saw something that made my hands freeze on the steering wheel. An abandoned building, a massive structure silhouetted against the moonlight. It looked like it had once been a factory or warehouse or something built for commerce. The windows were dark and empty. The doors hung open like a slack jaw. The paint was peeling in great chunks from the concrete walls. And from inside, I could hear the most haunting, terrifying sound I have ever heard in my life. The steady mechanical humming of a vending machine. Still humming. Still running. Still alive. The building felt utterly abandoned, like nothing human had entered it in years. But that machine kept running. Its noise was the only proof the place was still alive. The only thing keeping the darkness from being absolute silence. I should have left. Every part of my conscious mind screamed at me to get back in the car and drive away as fast as possible. But I was frozen, literally frozen. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. And slowly, almost against my own will, I opened the car door. The night air was cold and damp and smelled wrong. Not like the normal autumn Iowa smell of crops and soil and clean wind. This smelled like rust and stagnant water and something else underneath. Something organic. Something that had died a long time ago and never been properly buried. I walked toward the building. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The humming grew louder with every step. Louder and more insistent, like it was calling to me specifically. My footsteps echoed across the cracked concrete of what might have once been a loading dock. The doors hung crooked on their hinges, metal groaning in the breeze. Inside, the darkness was complete and suffocating. I could not see my own hand in front of my face. But I could hear that vending machine. It was the loudest, most vivid thing in that void. The mechanical sound of it echoing through the empty space. The quiet electric hum of its compressor. The faint rattle of coins inside its mechanism, like tiny bones shaking. I pulled out my phone for light. But as soon as the screen illuminated, the burner phone in my other pocket began to ring. Not vibrate, ring. A loud, piercing ringtone that echoed through the building like a scream. And that is when I saw it. The vending machine was not in the center of the dark warehouse. It was standing at the far end, maybe 200 feet away. But it was not a normal vending machine. It was huge, impossibly huge, twice the size of any vending machine I had ever seen. And it was glowing, a soft, sickly pale glow that cast everything around it in shades of green and white. The display window showed something impossible. There were no candy bars, no chips, no sodas. The shelves were filled with phones. Hundreds of phones, thousands of phones, all arranged in neat rows. All identical to the burner phone ringing in my hand. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake up from this nightmare and find myself safe in my bed at home. But I took a step forward anyway. And another. The ringing grew louder, the glow brighter. I was walking toward that impossible machine like a man in a trance. When I was about 50 feet away, the ringing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise had been. It was a suffocating, heavy silence. The kind of silence that feels alive. The kind of silence that is waiting for something. I looked down at the burner phone in my hand. The screen was dark now. Whatever power it had was gone. But when I looked back up at the vending machine, its display had changed. The phones were gone. Instead, there was a face. A human face. Pale and emaciated with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched open in an expression that could have been a scream or a laugh. And I recognized it. I recognized it because it was my face. My face, aged by decades. My face, dead. I cannot explain what happened next in any way that makes logical sense. I blacked out. Or I jumped. Or something inside that building reached out and took me. The next thing I remember is waking up in my car on the side of Route 238, the sun rising behind me. The burner phone was gone. My car keys were in the ignition, and I was driving in the wrong direction with no memory of how I got that way. I drove for 6 hours without stopping. I drove straight through Iowa and into Illinois. I did not go home. I did not call Sarah. I could not face her with what I had seen. Instead, I got a motel room near Champaign and locked myself inside for 3 days. On the third day, there was a knock on the door. I opened it without thinking. It was a man in a dark suit. He had the kind of face you forget immediately after seeing it. Completely ordinary, completely forgettable. But his eyes were ancient. He asked me about the vending machine. He knew what I had seen. He knew about the burner phone. He knew about the face in the display. And then he told me something that made my blood freeze cold in my veins. He told me that I was not the first to go into that building. He told me that the vending machine has been there for at least 30 years. He told me that it appears in different locations every few months. Sometimes in abandoned hospitals, sometimes in empty shopping malls, sometimes in forgotten highway rest stops. It always looks slightly different, but it always does the same thing. It shows people their deaths. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, the deaths of people who are calling it. The people who found those burner phones. The people who got those calls. The people who had to know what that number connected to. All of them saw something in that machine. All of them saw the way they were going to die. All of them had been fighting that fate ever since. He asked me a question that I still cannot answer. He asked me if I was planning to go back there. If I was planning to call that number again. If I was planning to try to change what I had seen. I told him no. I told him I was going home and never thinking about this again. I told him I was going to live my life and pretend none of it had happened. He smiled. It was the most terrifying expression I have ever seen. He said that everyone says that. He said that every person who encounters the machine thinks they can simply forget about it. He said that is what the machine is counting on. Then he handed me something. A photograph. An old photograph, faded and yellowed with age. It showed the interior of a factory. In the background, barely visible, there was a vending machine. The same vending machine I had seen. But in the foreground, there was a man. The same man in the dark suit, looking exactly as he did in that moment. Exactly, down to the smallest detail. The photograph was dated 1987. I dropped the photograph. When I looked up, the man was gone. Just gone. No footsteps. No sound of a car. Nothing. I checked the hallway. Empty. I checked the parking lot. Empty. I checked the world around me and felt like I was the only person left alive. I came home 3 days later. Sarah did not ask where I had been. My kids did not call. It was like I had already been erased from their lives. Like I was living in the wrong version of the world. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of waking up in the morning and wondering if this would be the day. 2 weeks of flinching every time I heard a sound. 2 weeks of avoiding highways and abandoned buildings and anything that remotely resembled the number I had called. Then last night, I was working late in my office. Just reviewing insurance claims. Just trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy. And I heard it. That sound. That mechanical humming. Not far away. Right there in my office. Right there in my house. I did not need to search for the source. I already knew what I would find. And I was right. Standing in the corner of my office, where there had been empty space just moments before, was the vending machine. I am writing this now because I do not know what else to do. I do not know if this will reach anyone. I do not know if anyone will believe me. I do not know if there is any way to stop what is coming. But I know that if I do not document this, if I do not try to warn someone, then my death will be meaningless. The vending machine is humming. It has been humming for 4 hours. I can see my reflection in the glass display, and my face looks older than it did in that building. It looks closer to the face I saw that night. It looks like my time is running out. I'm going to open this machine now. I'm going to put my hand inside. I'm going to see what happens next. And if you are reading this, if someone is listening to this account and feeling that creeping sense of dread, then you need to know something crucial. Do not call the number. Do not go to the building. Do not open the machine, because the machine does not just show you your death. It shows everyone who knows about it. Everyone who listens to your story. Everyone who learns about the vending machine. The machine is hungry, and it is always looking for new people to call. Story 5. Last shift, I should have trusted my gut the moment I pulled into that truck stop on Route 40. The creepy feeling started before I even turned off the engine. You know that unsettling sensation you get sometimes, the one where every hair on your body stands on end for no reason you can explain. That is what I felt. That terrifying, primal awareness that something is fundamentally wrong with the world around you. I was driving through Nevada at 2 in the morning, exhausted from 17 hours behind the wheel, and all I wanted was coffee and a bathroom. What I found instead was something that would change my understanding of fear forever. The gas station was called Harlow S. Stop. A faded sign hung above the building like a skeleton, barely lit by 2 flickering lights that cast eerie shadows across the cracked asphalt. The place looked ancient, like it had been standing in the desert for decades, slowly being consumed by wind and time. The architecture was that weird, unsettling style from the 70s, all brown and orange in wrong angles. Through the windows, I could see fluorescent lights burning inside, harsh and bright against the black night. Everything about it screamed danger, but I needed that coffee. I should have driven past. The parking lot was completely empty. Not a single car besides mine. At 2 in the morning, I should have expected that, but something about the emptiness felt intentional, like the world had decided to clear a space just for what was about to happen to me. The gas station looked open. The lights were on, and I could see movement inside, or at least I thought I could. Shapes, maybe. Shadows. Things I could not quite focus on no matter how hard I stared. My hand shook as I opened the car door. The desert air hit me like a physical force, dry and cold and tasting of dust and something else. Something metallic. The night was so dark, so impossibly dark, that the few lights from the station seemed to create more shadows than they dispelled. That eerie darkness pressed against me from all directions. I walked toward the entrance, my footsteps echoing on the pavement in a way that sounded wrong, too loud, too hollow. The door chimed as I stepped inside. The chime was the most normal sound I had heard all night, which somehow made it worse. The interior of Harlow's stop was exactly what you would expect from the outside. A classic gas station layout with aisles of snacks, a refrigerated section along the back wall, and a counter near the front where cashiers usually stood during normal hours. But there was no one there. The horrifying truth was immediately obvious. No employees were visible anywhere. Not at the counter, not stocking shelves, not in the back office. Nothing. Just me and the fluorescent lights humming an unsettling electric song above my head. But the coffee pot was still warm. I found it on a counter near the back, a commercial-grade machine that probably served hundreds of customers every day. The coffee inside was still steaming. Not cold, not even lukewarm. Actually hot, as if someone had just brewed it minutes ago. I stared at that coffee for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of the terrifying impossibility in front of me. Where was the person who made it? The chilling realization crept into my mind like a shadow spreading across a wall. Someone had been here, recently, very recently, and they had vanished. I should have left right then. But the nightmare was just beginning. I moved deeper into the store, past the snack aisle, searching for any sign of human life. The fluorescent lights seemed to grow brighter and more harsh the further I went, creating sharp shadows that made everything look distorted and nightmarish. The shelves were fully stocked, everything perfectly arranged like a display in a magazine. Too perfect, uncannily perfect. No items out of place, no dust, no evidence that anything had moved in hours. It was like walking through a diorama of a gas station rather than an actual functioning business. The eerie atmosphere thickened around me, pressing against my chest, making every breath feel labored. At the back of the store, near the refrigerated section, I found the first thing that truly terrified me. A pair of shoes. They were sitting on the floor, neatly placed side by side, about 10 feet from the drink coolers. Work shoes, the kind that gas station attendants wear, black and worn and absolutely abandoned. No socks inside them, nothing to suggest the person had simply stepped out of them to put on new ones. They were just sitting there, empty and accusatory, like they had been waiting for someone to find them. I stood frozen, staring at those shoes, my mind refusing to process what they meant. The terrifying implication was undeniable. Someone had been standing there, in those shoes, and then they had not been. No explanation. No rational reason. Just gone. The chilling silence of the store suddenly felt like a living thing, like something that was watching me, waiting to see what I would do next. I forced myself to move. My legs felt weak, barely capable of supporting my weight, but I walked toward the front counter, my heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to escape. Behind the counter, I found a small office space, completely dark except for the glow of a computer screen that had gone into sleep mode. A chair sat in front of the desk, and on the desk sat a nameplate. Derek. This was Derek's station. Derek worked the night shift at Harlow's stop on Route 40 in Nevada. And Derek was gone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I nearly jumped out of my skin. A text message from an unknown number. Just 7 words. Just 7 words that made the horror of that moment complete. Do not leave the building alone tonight. The terrifying question erupted in my mind like a scream. How? How was this possible? I had not called anyone. I had not told anyone where I was. How could someone know I was here? How could someone have my phone number? I fumbled with my phone, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it, and I tried to dial 911. Nothing. No service. The signal bars on my phone showed nothing. Dead air, complete isolation from the outside world. That eerie silence settled over me again, thicker than before. I needed to leave. Every instinct I possessed was screaming at me to run, to get back to my car, to drive away from this horrifying place and never look back. But the text message had said something specific. Do not leave the building alone. What did that mean? Alone? Was I alone? Was someone else in the station with me right now? I stood frozen in the middle of the store, listening, trying to hear anything that would tell me if I was truly by myself. Then I heard it, a sound from the back of the building. A door closing, maybe, or something heavy shifting. A creepy, distant noise that could have been anything but sounded like intention. Sounded like something that had been waiting for me to notice it was there. I moved toward the sound, completely against my better judgment, drawn by a horrible curiosity that I could not overcome. In the nightmare logic of that moment, it seemed better to face whatever was waiting for me than to stand paralyzed by not knowing. The back office was smaller than I expected, just a desk, a filing cabinet, and a door that led to the storage room. That door was open. The darkness beyond it was absolute. a chilling blackness that seemed to swallow the light from the office completely. And I could see something in that darkness. Not clearly, just shapes, outlines of things that made no sense. And in that unsettling darkness, I heard breathing. Not my breathing, something else. Something that matched my rhythm but was not quite synchronized, creating an eerie double beat that made my skin crawl. I backed away slowly, unable to tear my eyes from that open door. The horrifying realization was becoming clearer with every passing second. I was not alone in this building. Whatever had happened to Derek was not finished yet. Whatever was waiting in that storage room had sent me that text message, had known exactly where I would go, had planned this entire terrifying scenario from the moment I pulled into the parking lot. I made it back to the front of the store, my breathing now ragged and uncontrolled. My hand went to my car keys, still in my pocket, and I lunged for the front door. That chime sounded again as I burst out into the desert night, and I ran to my car without looking back, without listening to any rational thought that might have stopped me. I fumbled with the key, shoved it into the ignition, and started the engine. The headlights came on, illuminating the empty parking lot, and in that moment, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice water. In the window of the station, standing perfectly still and watching me with an intensity that I could feel from 50 yards away, was a figure. Not Derek, not anyone I recognized, tall and impossibly thin, with a face that I could not quite focus on, like my brain refused to register the details of what I was seeing. The terrifying truth slammed into me. That was not a person. That was something else entirely. Something that had been inside that station. Something that had been waiting for me. Something that wore the shape of a human being the way a hermit crab wears a shell. I slammed the car into reverse and hit the accelerator. The distance between me and that place grew, but the chilling feeling did not fade. I drove for hours, not stopping, not slowing down, constantly checking my mirrors to see if anything was following me. By the time the sun came up, I had driven almost 300 miles. My phone had regained service just before dawn, and I called the state police and reported what I had found. They sent an officer to Harrow to stop to investigate. The officer found the station completely empty. No shoes, no coffee pot, no evidence of anyone ever working there. The officer found it abandoned. Had been for years apparently, a condemned building that technically should not have been accessible to anyone. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had experienced. The eerie atmosphere of that place. The terrifying impossibility of a warm coffee pot with no one to have made it. The shoes sitting empty on the floor. The figure in the window that was not quite human. The text message from someone who could not exist. The scariest part came 2 weeks later when I received another text message. The same unknown number, just 5 words this time. You left Derek behind. I never found out what happened to Derek. I never found out what was really waiting in that storage room. I never found out how that thing knew my phone number, how it had orchestrated everything so perfectly, or why it let me leave. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that coffee pot and how it was still warm, and I wonder if the nightmare is really over. I wonder if that thing is still waiting inside Harrow, is stopped, still making fresh coffee, still waiting for another exhausted driver to pull into that empty parking lot at 2 in the morning. I wonder if I will ever get the chance to leave that place permanently, or if I am still there somehow, still standing in that horrifying darkness, waiting for my body to finally catch up to the part of me that never escaped at all. Story 6. Payphone that rang once. I was driving through nowhere at 3 in the morning when my battery died. Not slowly, dead. One moment my GPS was talking to me. The next the screen went black, and the car felt darker than any darkness I had ever known before. My phone was completely unresponsive. I tried the engine light button. Nothing. So I pulled over on the side of Route 22, somewhere between Pennsylvania and Ohio, and I waited for my hands to stop shaking. That is when I first saw the diner. It appeared through the rain like something that was not quite sure it belonged in the real world. The neon sign in the window flickered between colors that did not exist in nature. Pink became sickly green. Red bled into something purple and obscene. The lights inside cast everything in a glow that made my skin crawl with an unsettling dread I could not explain. I was terrified already, and I did not even know why yet. My gas gauge read half full. I had no signal. The highway stretched in both directions like the throat of some enormous animal. The diner was maybe a quarter-mile away, down a service road that disappeared into the darkness. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to go, but the alternative was to sit in my broken car until morning, alone on an empty highway. with nothing but my fear for company. I grabbed my keys, I locked the doors, I started walking toward the lights. The rain felt wrong on my skin as I walked. It was not cold or hot. It felt thick, almost sticky, like walking through something alive. The diner grew larger the closer I got, and I realized it was much bigger than it had appeared from the road. The building stretched back into the darkness in ways that seemed wrong when I tried to map it in my mind. There were no other cars in the parking lot. The asphalt was cracked and ancient, covered in stains that could have been anything. When I pushed open the door, the bell above it did not ring. It hung there from a rusty chain and did not make a sound. Inside, the diner was exactly what a haunted diner should look like. Red vinyl booths that might have been new in 1957. A long counter with chrome details now tarnished to the color of old teeth. The walls were covered in photographs of people I did not recognize. Some of the photos were modern, some looked like they were from decades ago. In many of them, the people in the pictures seemed to be standing in the same diner, at the same table, in the same booth. But the people were different ages, different styles of clothes, different everything. It was as if they were all experiencing the same moment across different timelines. There was no one at the counter, no one in the booths, no one in the kitchen. The diner was completely empty. A coffee cup sat on the counter, steam still rising from it. A creepy silence hung over everything, thick and oppressive. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I could hear the blood moving through my veins. But I could not hear anything else. No hum of refrigerators, no buzz of the neon signs, no sound of traffic from the highway. Just my fear, made into sound. I walked to the counter and sat on one of the chrome stools. My hands were shaking. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and something else. Something organic and decaying. Something that made my stomach turn in ways I could not control. I told myself it was just old food, probably rotting somewhere behind the scenes. But part of me knew it was something worse. Something scarier than anything that could rot. That is when I heard the phone. The payphone was in the corner, near the bathroom, near a doorway that led into darkness. I had not seen it when I walked in, but now I could not stop looking at it. The phone was old, genuinely old, from the 80s at least. The metal housing was yellow and dinged with thousands of small impacts. The receiver hung from its cord like a hanged man. The phone rang just long enough to be noticed. One ring, two rings, a sound that cut through the creepy silence like a blade. My first instinct was to ignore it, to sit very still and pretend I did not hear it. But something else inside me, something older than reason, something that predates civilization itself, something primal and terrifying, made me stand up from the stool. I walked toward the phone as if I had no control over my own legs. As if something invisible had hooked me through my chest and was pulling me forward. The diner suddenly felt smaller and larger at the same time. The walls seemed to curve inward. The ceiling seemed to recede into an infinite distance. The photographs on the walls began to feel like they were watching me. Hundreds of eyes, all focused on me, all waiting to see what I would do. I reached the payphone and lifted the receiver. The cord was colder than anything should be cold. It was the temperature of deep winter at midnight. It was the temperature of a grave. The line was dead. Not silent, dead. There was no dial tone. There was no static. There was nothing. Just an absence so complete it felt like it was reaching out and crushing my chest from the inside. The silence was heavier than any sound. It was the silence of something vast and hungry and completely alien to anything I had ever experienced. It was the silence of something that should not exist in our world. I hung up the phone and turned to walk back to the counter. The diner had changed. The photographs were different. The people in them were still standing in the same diner, at the same tables, in the same booths. But now I was in some of the photographs. There was me sitting at the counter. There was me standing by the bathroom door. There was me holding the phone. All of these moments were happening at the same time. All of these were real. I ran toward the front door. The door would not open. The handle turned, but the door itself did not move. It was as if the door was painted on the wall. I pulled, and my hand slipped on the frame, and something began to change in the diner behind me. The lights started to flicker. Not like a normal electrical problem. They flickered in patterns, in sequences, like they were trying to communicate in a language that was not English. That is when I understood something terrifying. The photographs were not of different people. They were all of me. All different ages. All different moments in my life. But I recognized them now that I was truly looking. There was me at 7 years old, sitting in a booth. There was me at 17 years old, standing by the jukebox. There was me at every single age, in every single year of my life I could remember, sitting in this diner. The creepy feeling intensified. The unsettling realization began to bloom in my mind like something poisonous. The payphone rang again. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings, but this time it did not stop. It kept ringing and ringing, and with each ring, something in the diner began to break. The countertop cracked. The booths began to splinter. The ceiling developed long fissures that bled something thick and dark. I screamed and ran toward the bathroom door. It opened at my touch, and I fell through it into darkness that was absolute and complete. I fell down and down and down, and the phone kept ringing above me, further and further away, until I could not hear it anymore. I woke up in my car. The sun was rising. My phone had a full battery. My engine started without any problems. Everything was normal. The diner was nowhere to be seen. There was nothing on the service road but trees and broken pavement. No building. No lights. Nothing. I drove to the next town. The first person I asked about the diner looked confused. They had no idea what I was talking about. There was no diner on Route 22. There had never been a diner. There was no service road. There was nothing there but forest and farmland that stretched for miles. But I knew what I had seen. I knew the diner was real. I drove back to Route 22 3 days later. I found the place where I had broken down. I parked the car and walked along the shoulder of the highway, looking for any sign of the service road. There was nothing. No pavement. No path. Just grass and wild growth that had been undisturbed for years. Until I looked up, the diner was visible in the distance, across the fields. Not on the service road. Not where a diner should be. It was floating in the air, suspended between the ground and the clouds, silent and still and waiting for something. Waiting for someone. The lights were off. The neon sign was dark. But I could see the photographs in the windows. Thousands of them, maybe millions, and they were all showing the same thing. They were all showing what happens next. I have not driven Route 22 since that day, but I think about that diner every single night. I think about the photographs. I think about the payphone. I think about the question that has been growing in my mind since that moment, getting scarier and scarier with each passing year. The diner was not pulling me forward. Something in the diner was waiting for me to arrive, something that has been waiting my entire life, something that exists outside of normal time and space, something that has already experienced every moment of my life, from the beginning to the end, and is simply waiting for me to walk into the photograph. Last week, my phone went dead while I was driving at night. It had a full battery, but it died instantly. I felt my stomach drop. I knew exactly where I was on the map. I was on Route 22. I was approaching the stretch of highway where nothing should exist. I took the next exit. I drove into town and I pulled into a motel parking lot. But as I walked toward the office, I realized something terrifying was wrong. The motel had photographs covering every single wall. Hundreds of pictures, all showing different people, all in the same haunted motel room. And there was something I recognized about that room. The lights were off when I looked out the window. But I could see them anyway. I could see a payphone in the corner of the room. I could see the receiver hanging from its cord. I could see myself sitting on the motel bed, waiting for the phone to ring. The phone rang just long enough to be noticed. When it stopped, the silence felt heavier than before, and I realized that I was already dead. I had died that first night in the diner. Everything that happened after that was just the diner showing me what comes next. The diner was not trying to trap me in the past. It was trying to show me the future. It was trying to prepare me for the creepy, haunting truth that I had already arrived at the place where I was always supposed to end up. The nightmare was not beginning. It was ending. And the worst part, the most terrifying realization of all, is that I was not the first person to understand this. The diner has been collecting them for decades, centuries, maybe longer. All the people in those photographs, all the faces looking out from the walls, they all arrived at that moment thinking they were lost, thinking they needed help. But what they actually found was a mirror, a way of seeing the future that was already written. I check into that motel room every night now. I sit on the bed and I wait for the payphone to ring. It never comes before I fall asleep. But I know it is coming. I know that eventually the ring will come, and when I answer it, there will be someone on the other end. Someone who is lost on Route 22. Someone whose battery just died. Someone who is about to arrive at the diner, and I will have to stay silent while they go through what I went through. I will have to watch them understand the horrifying truth. I will have to remain in this place, frozen between one moment and the next, waiting for them to take their place on the walls. Waiting for the photograph to be taken. The phone will ring tomorrow night. I can feel it coming. And when it does, I will not answer. I cannot answer, because answering means I become part of someone else. This nightmare. Answering means I have to be the voice on the other end. Answering means I have to guide them back to the diner, back to the payphone, back to the photographs. But I am running out of reasons not to answer. The silence between the rings is getting shorter. The darkness outside the motel room windows is getting closer. And somewhere out there on Route 22, another car is breaking down. Another person is discovering that their phone has died. Another desperate soul is looking for shelter in the rain. Another frightened driver is about to see the neon signs of a diner that should not exist. The scariest part is this. Every single person in those photographs took my place. Every single person came before me. Every single person made the choice I made. Every single person thought they were unique, thought they were special, thought that their story was different from everyone else who came before them. But the diner has seen them all, and the diner is still waiting. The payphone is still hanging there in the darkness. The photographs are still covering the walls. And somewhere, someone is pulling into the service road, out of the rain, looking for help, looking for warmth, looking for any sign that they are not alone in this haunted world. They are walking toward the door right now. Their hand is reaching for the handle. The bell above the door is about to stay silent. And I'm already in the photograph, watching from the wall, waiting to see their face when they realize the truth. Story 7. Someone had just left. What would you do if you discovered you were being hunted in a place where nobody could hear you scream? This is my account. This is what happened to me. And I am still trying to understand how I survived. My name is David. I work as a forestry inspector for the state of Montana. I hike into remote areas all year long. I have spent more nights alone in the wilderness than most people spend nights in their own beds. I know what fear is. I know what real danger feels like. But nothing in my life prepared me for what occurred during those 72 hours in the Glacier Peak wilderness. It started on a Tuesday morning in late November. The snow had come early that year. Heavy, wet snow that stuck to everything and made the world look like a place that had been forgotten by time. I was hiking to a remote ranger station about 8 miles from the nearest road, tasked with checking the structure and making sure everything was secure before the worst of winter set in. The hike was supposed to take 3 hours. I had done it dozens of times before, but the snow was deeper than the forecasters had predicted. My pace slowed. The world around me became increasingly quiet and white. No birds, no animals, just the sound of my footsteps breaking through the crust of the snow and the wind through the skeletal branches of the pine trees. By early afternoon, I reached the ranger station. The small wooden building sat in a clearing, surrounded by ancient forest on all sides. It was exactly as I remembered it. A one-room structure with a wood stove, a cot, a desk, and enough supplies to last a few days if necessary. The door was locked as it should have been. I used the key from my pack and went inside. The air was cold but not freezing. I checked the structure, made my notes, restocked the supplies, and started thinking about heading back down the mountain before darkness fell. But something made me pause. The creepy, unsettling feeling started as a tightness in my chest. The kind of sensation that animals must feel when they sense a predator nearby. I stood very still in the middle of that small room and tried to understand what was wrong. The window at the back of the station was dirty, covered in dust and pine needles from months of seasonal weather. But there was a section that had been wiped clean. Deliberately wiped. Someone had stood at that window and looked inside. My heart rate increased. I walked slowly to the window and looked out. Beyond the glass was nothing but dense forest and the disturbing white silence of falling snow. No movement, no shadows, just trees and darkness between them. I told myself this was not necessarily terrifying. Maybe a ranger had checked on the place recently. Maybe the supervisor had sent someone to verify the status. But I knew that was not true. I was the only inspector assigned to this area. I would have known if someone else had been here. I made a decision that I would spend the night. It was too late in the day to safely navigate back down the mountain in these conditions. The forest would be nearly black by the time I made it down. Snow was still falling. Better to wait for morning, to rest, to figure out what was happening. I started a fire in the wood stove. I prepared some food from the supplies. I told myself I was being paranoid. Fear has a way of making you see threats that are not there. The mind is a powerful tool, and in isolation, it can turn against you. As darkness fell outside, I began to feel genuinely scared and horrified by my own thoughts. What if someone was out there? What if they were waiting for the sun to set? What if they had been watching this station for weeks, waiting for someone to arrive? I double-checked the locks on the door. I locked the windows. I kept the lights off except for the glow from the fire. If someone was out there, I did not want to advertise my presence. That night, I did not sleep. I sat by the fire and stared at the darkness beyond. Every sound outside made my heart jump. The wind sounded like footsteps. Tree branches crashing under the weight of snow sounded like something moving through the forest. The eerie, unsettling symphony of a winter night in the mountains became a nightmare of my own creation. Or so I hoped. Around 3 a.m, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Voices. There were voices outside the station. Low, quiet voices, but definitely people. More than one. Multiple voices speaking in tones too quiet to make out words, but close enough that I could hear them plainly. I grabbed a flashlight and a length of firewood from the pile and went to the window. I looked out carefully, trying not to make myself a target for whatever was happening outside. What I saw will stay with me for the rest of my life. There were 4 figures standing in the clearing outside the station. They were barely visible in the darkness, their forms almost blending into the night itself. They were not moving, they were simply standing there, facing the building, facing me. I do not know how long I stared at them. Time became strange. It could have been seconds or minutes. But eventually I realized what was truly horrifying about the scene. They were not reacting to the light from my flashlight. They could not see me, or they were choosing not to acknowledge my presence. I turned off the flashlight and pressed myself against the wall. My hands were shaking. My breathing was shallow and rapid. Every survival instinct I possessed was screaming at me that I was in the presence of something dangerous. Something that did not follow normal human behavior. When I looked out again, they were gone. I waited until dawn, never taking my eyes off the windows, never moving far from the fire. The darkness seemed to press in on me with physical weight. The silence was absolute and terrifying. Just the snap of the fire and the distant sound of wind through the trees. When the sun finally began to rise, I felt a wave of relief that was almost painful. The light revealed a world that looked normal again. Snow covered everything. The clearing was white and untouched and empty. But it was not empty. I put on my boots and jacket and forced myself outside. I needed to see what had left evidence of being here. I needed proof that I had not imagined everything. The footprints were immediately visible in the fresh snow. Multiple sets of them, all leading from the forest on one side of the clearing directly to the window where I had seen someone wiping away the dust. The tracks were deep and deliberate, made by people who had stood there watching the station for an extended period of time. But here is where it becomes truly eerie and unsettling. There were no other tracks. No tracks leading back toward the forest. No tracks leading in any other direction. The footprints simply appeared in the clearing and ended at the window, as if the 4 figures had materialized out of thin air. Someone had just left. Footprints in fresh snow led away from the entrance. There were no other tracks around. I stared at this impossible sight for a long time. My mind tried to construct a logical explanation. Maybe they had walked backward, erasing their tracks. Maybe the wind had covered their path. But even as I thought these things, I knew they were not true. The wind was not blowing hard enough to erase tracks so completely, and walking backward in deep snow would have left equally visible prints. What I was seeing was not logical. What I was seeing should not have been possible. I made a decision that probably saved my life. I packed my supplies and I left. Not down the mountain the way I had come, but east, toward the ridgeline. I was going to move fast and get to higher ground where I could see anything approaching from a distance. For the next 2 days, I hiked constantly. I barely stopped to rest. I pushed my body beyond what I thought was possible, driven by a fear so pure and primal that it overrode hunger and exhaustion and pain. But I was being followed. I could sense it more than see it. The feeling of being watched that never went away. Sometimes I would hear sounds behind me. The crack of a branch. The muffled footstep in the snow. When I turned around, there was nothing there. Just empty forest and white silence. The nightmare scenario that played over and over in my mind was this. They knew the terrain. They knew I was trying to reach the ridge. They were herding me, driving me toward a location where they could corner me. On the 3rd day, weakened and exhausted and barely thinking clearly anymore, I staggered down the eastern slope of the mountain and found a road. A real road with tire tracks and signs of civilization. I walked down that road until I saw a ranger station, a different one, where another Forest Service employee was parked. I must have looked absolutely terrifying, because the ranger immediately called for help. I was taken to a hospital. I had severe dehydration and mild hypothermia. My feet were blistered. I had lost 12 pounds in 3 days. For weeks afterward, I told the authorities what I had seen. But there was a problem with my story. Search and rescue sent teams to investigate the ranger station and the surrounding area. They found nothing. No footprints. No evidence that anyone else had been there. The window at the back of the station showed no signs of being wiped clean. The investigation concluded that I had experienced a psychological episode brought on by isolation and stress. But I know what I saw. And here's the truly horrifying part. The thing that keeps me awake at night and makes me question my sanity. 3 weeks after this happened, a hiker went missing in the same area. A man named Robert Chen, age 42. He was an experienced outdoorsman. He knew how to survive, but he never came out of those mountains. 2 months later, another hiker disappeared. Then another, all in the same region. All experienced people who should not have gotten lost. All vanishing without a trace. The official explanation is that the terrain is dangerous. That people underestimate the difficulty. That bodies are hard to find in remote mountain areas. But I know better. Something's out there. Something that wears human form when it wants to be seen. Something that moves through those mountains without leaving a trail. Something that hunts people who venture too far into the wilderness. I have not been back to the forest since that day. I resigned from my job 3 months later. I could not face the thought of returning to those mountains. I could not face the possibility of encountering those figures again. The terrifying and disturbing truth is this. I do not think I was the target. I think the ranger station was just a location they had marked. A place where they knew people would eventually arrive. I was just the first one to interrupt their pattern. I do not know how many people they have taken since then. I do not know what they do with those people once they have herded them deep enough into the wilderness. I only know that something is wrong in those mountains. Something that should not exist is moving through that landscape, hunting, waiting, watching. And the worst part is the creepy, eerie realization that if I had stayed at that station for one more night, I would have been caught. Those figures would have come back. They would have gotten inside, and I would have become another disappearance statistic. The nightmare does not end when you escape the location. The fear lingers. The unsettling knowledge that there are places on this earth where the normal rules do not apply. Where human beings are not the top predator. Where something older and more dangerous than we can comprehend is still waiting in the darkness. Somewhere in those mountains right now, something is standing outside a ranger station, wiping away the dust from a window, watching the fire inside, waiting for the sun to set. Someone had just left the station that night I arrived, or perhaps something that wears the appearance of someone had just left. And it is still out there, still hunting, still waiting, still watching for the next person foolish enough to venture into the wilderness alone. Story 8. Locked doors from the inside. The doors would not open, even though no one was there, and that impossibility became my nightmare for 72 hours inside the Riverside Motel off Interstate 40 in eastern Oklahoma. I am an insurance adjuster, 47 years old, and I have stayed in hundreds of motels across America during my career. Nothing about this place seemed unusual when I checked in that Thursday evening in late October. Just another aging roadside motel with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign, the kind you find in every forgotten town across the heartland. But leaving felt urgent, but complicated, in ways I still cannot fully explain to anyone who asks why I look so different now, why my hands shake when I hear doors closing, why I refuse to stay anywhere with interior hallways ever again. The creepy feeling started the moment I stepped into room 217. The air inside felt wrong, too thick and heavy, like breathing through wet fabric. The carpet beneath my feet gave off a musty smell that reminded me of funeral homes and abandoned basements. Everything looked normal enough at first glance. A queen bed with a faded floral comforter, a wooden dresser with a television bolted on top, a small bathroom visible through an open doorway. But something disturbing hung in that space, something I felt in my bones before my brain could process what was actually happening. I dropped my overnight bag on the bed and decided to grab dinner from the diner I had passed a mile back down the highway. When I reached for the door handle to leave, it would not turn. I twisted harder, putting my full weight into it, but the mechanism refused to budge. The deadbolt sat in the unlocked position. The chain hung loose against the doorframe. Yet somehow that door remained sealed shut like it had been welded into place. My heart started beating faster as I examined the lock more carefully. Nothing looked broken or jammed. The handle turned smoothly in my grip. The deadbolt slid back and forth without resistance, but the door itself would not open even a fraction of an inch. I pressed my shoulder against it and pushed with all my strength. The door did not move. Not even a rattle, not even the slightest skid. It felt like pushing against solid concrete. That eerie moment when I realized I was trapped in ice water through my veins. I pulled out my phone to call the front desk, but I had no signal. No bars, no data, nothing. I tried the room phone next, lifting the receiver to my ear, but heard only silence. Not even a dial tone, just dead air, empty and waiting. The bathroom door slammed shut behind me with enough force to rattle the mirror on the wall. I spun around, my pulse hammering in my throat. I had not touched that door. It had been standing open when I came in, propped against the wall, but now it was closed tight. I walked over and tried the handle. Locked, from the inside, somehow, even though no one was in there. The horrifying reality of my situation started to sink in. Every door in this room had sealed itself shut, and I was alone with no way to call for help, no way to escape. The shadows in the corners seemed to grow darker as the sun set outside, creeping across the walls like living things. I checked every window, but they had been painted shut years ago, the frames warped and swollen with moisture. Even if I broke the glass, the openings were too small to crawl through. Night fell fast and complete. The darkness outside the windows looked absolute. No streetlights visible, no passing cars, no signs of civilization at all. Just that chilling emptiness pressing against the glass. I turned on every light in the room, but the bulbs gave off a weak yellow glow that barely pushed back the shadows. The television would not turn on no matter how many times I pressed the power button. My phone battery was draining impossibly fast, dropping from 80% to 30% in the span of 10 minutes. Then I heard the scratching, soft at first, almost imperceptible, coming from inside the walls. A dry, scraping sound like fingernails on wood, moving slowly from one side of the room to the other. I pressed my ear against the wall, listening, and the scratching stopped immediately. Complete silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then it started again, this time directly behind the headboard of the bed, so close I could feel the vibration through the mattress. Something was inside the walls with me, something that knew I was listening. I pulled the bed away from the wall, half expecting to find a hole or gap where rats or insects might be getting in. Instead, I found words carved into the wallpaper, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, scratched in tiny letters that covered the entire section of wall that had been hidden behind the headboard. The same phrase repeated over and over again in frantic, desperate handwriting. They want you to stay. They want you to stay. They want you to stay. My hands went numb as I read those terrifying words. Someone else had been trapped in this room before me. Someone who had been here long enough to carve warnings into the walls. The fear crawling up my spine turned into something close to panic. I started pounding on the door with my fists, shouting for help, but my voice sounded muffled and distant, like the room itself was swallowing the sound. The scratching in the walls grew louder, more aggressive, and now I could hear it coming from multiple directions at once. Above me in the ceiling, below me in the floor, all around me in the walls. A symphony of scraping and clawing that made my teeth ache. Whatever was making those sounds was getting closer, working its way through the structure of the building toward my room. The bathroom door opened, slowly, silently, swinging outward on its hinges to reveal complete darkness inside. The light I had left on was gone, extinguished somehow, and the blackness beyond that doorway looked wrong. Too thick, too absolute, like staring into the void between stars. Something moved in that darkness. I saw it shift and writhe, a shadow darker than the surrounding black, a presence that radiated pure malevolence. I backed away until I hit the opposite wall, my eyes locked on that open bathroom doorway, unable to look away even though every instinct screamed at me to run. The shadow began to emerge, taking form as it crossed the threshold into the main room. It looked almost human at first glance, a tall figure in what might have been clothes, but the proportions were all wrong. The arms too long, the head tilted at an unnatural angle, the movements jerky and insect-like. It stopped in the center of the room and turned toward me. Where its face should have been, I saw only a smooth, featureless surface like skin stretched too tight over bone. But I knew it was looking at me. I felt its attention like physical weight pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. The figure raised one impossibly long arm and pointed at the bed. Then it turned and walked back into the bathroom, disappearing into that disturbing darkness. The door slammed shut behind it with enough force to crack the frame. I did not sleep that night. I sat with my back against the wall, watching both doors, jumping at every sound. The scratching continued for hours, sometimes faint and distant, other times so close and loud it sounded like something was about to burst through the walls. My phone died completely around midnight, leaving me alone with just the weak overhead light and my growing terror. Morning came eventually, gray light seeping through the windows, but it brought no relief. The doors remained locked, sealed tight from the inside by forces I could not begin to understand. I was so thirsty my tongue felt like leather in my mouth. The bathroom sink would have had water, but I was not going back in there. Not after what I had seen emerge from that darkness. I spent that second day searching for any possible way out. I examined every inch of the room, looking for weaknesses, for anything I could use to break through a wall or door. I found more carved messages hidden in strange places, behind the dresser, underneath the nightstand, even scratched into the back of the television. All different handwriting, all conveying the same haunting message. Day 3 they take you. Day 3 you become them. Leave before day 3. That chilling discovery sent my mind reeling. How many people had been trapped in this room before me? How many had carved their warnings into the hidden spaces, hoping someone would find them? And what happened on day 3? The second night was worse than the first. The shadow figure appeared again, this time standing beside my bed, looming over me as I huddled in the corner. It stayed there for hours, motionless and silent, that blank face turned toward me. I could feel it trying to communicate something, pushing thoughts and images into my mind. Terrible visions of other people who had stayed in this room, people who had not found a way out in time. I saw them transforming, their bodies twisting and contorting, their faces smoothing over into those same featureless masks. I saw them walking into the walls and disappearing, joining the things that scratched and clawed inside the structure, trapped forever in the spaces between rooms. The horrifying realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The scratching sounds were not coming from rats or insects. They were coming from people, former guests of the Riverside Motel who had stayed too long, who had been absorbed into the building itself. On the morning of the third day, I woke to find the bathroom door standing open again. The darkness inside had been replaced by normal light, and I could see my reflection in the mirror above the sink. Except it was not quite my reflection. The face looking back at me was smooth and blank, the features fading like someone had smudged them with an eraser. My real face still looked normal when I touched it, but in that mirror, I was already starting to change. Panic gave me strength I did not know I had. I grabbed the wooden chair from beside the desk and swung it at the window with everything I had. The glass shattered, the frame splintered, and cool morning air rushed into the room. The opening was small, barely large enough to fit through, but I did not care. I started climbing, cutting my hands and arms on the broken glass, squeezing my body through that narrow gap. Behind me, the shadow figures emerged from the walls. Not just one this time, but dozens of them, pouring out of impossible spaces, reaching toward me with those long, distorted arms. The scratching sound exploded into a deafening roar as every trapped soul in that building tried to stop me from escaping. I fell through the window and hit the ground outside, landing hard on my shoulder. Pain shot through my body, but I forced myself to stand and run. I ran across the parking lot, not looking back, heading for the highway. The motel behind me looked different in the daylight. Decrepit and abandoned, windows boarded up, the neon sign dark and broken. It looked like it had been closed for years, maybe decades. My car sat exactly where I had parked it the night before, covered in a thick layer of dust and dead leaves. The keys were still in my pocket. I jumped inside, started the engine, and drove away as fast as that old sedan would carry me. In the rearview mirror, I watched the Riverside Motel shrink into the distance, that terrible building where doors lock from the inside and visitors become permanent residents. I checked into a hospital 3 hours later. The doctors could not explain the cuts on my arms, the bruises on my body, or why my face looked slightly different than the photo on my driver's license. They thought maybe I had been in some kind of accident, suffering from confusion and trauma. I let them believe whatever made sense to them. But I know the truth. I know that building is still there on Interstate 40, waiting for its next guest. I know the doors will lock again, sealing someone inside, and the scratching will start in the walls. I know on day 3, they will transform and join the others, trapped forever in that nightmare motel. Sometimes late at night, I still hear scratching in the walls of my own home. Soft and distant, but definitely there. And when I look in mirrors, my reflection looks just slightly wrong. The features just a bit too smooth, fading slowly day by day. I think part of me never really left that room. And sooner or later, I am afraid the rest of me will have to go back. Story 9. Waiting room. I woke up in a place I had never been before with no memory of how I got there, and the clock on the wall was running backwards. That sounds like something from a nightmare, but I am telling you the absolute truth. My name is Marcus. I am 53 years old, and I have worked as a truck driver for the past 28 years. I drive across America. I know highways. I know motels. I know the lonely stretches of road that connect the living world to the forgotten places. But what happened to me on that drive from Denver to Kansas City changed everything I thought I understood about reality. The day started normally. I was making good time on Interstate 70, heading east with a full load of freight. The weather was clear. The road was smooth. I had been on the road since dawn, and by early afternoon I was feeling the creeping fatigue that comes from staring at asphalt for 12 hours straight. I saw a sign for a rest stop about 30 miles outside of Salina, Kansas. Nothing fancy, just a small facility off the highway. The kind of place that exists to serve travelers like me. I pulled in around 2 o'clock. The parking lot was nearly empty. Just a few other vehicles scattered across the massive expanse of concrete. I remember thinking how eerie and quiet it felt for 2 in the afternoon. Where was everyone? Where were the families stopping for bathroom breaks and snacks? The parking lot should have been fuller. It should have been noisier. I went inside anyway. The building was long and low, typical of those rest stops you see dotting the American highways. The interior was brightly lit with fluorescent lights that hummed with that annoying frequency that makes your teeth ache. I used the bathroom. I washed my hands. I checked my phone. Nothing unusual. Everything seemed completely normal. But then I walked into the main room, and that is when the creeping sense of dread began to settle into my bones. The room was empty. Completely empty. No people. No families. No other travelers. Nothing but rows of empty chairs and vending machines lining the walls. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sickly artificial brightness. It was the kind of empty that does not feel natural. The kind of empty that feels wrong. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was 2 o'clock on a weekday. Maybe everyone was just outside. Maybe I had missed the crowd. I sat down in one of the chairs and pulled out my phone to check my messages. I remember setting a timer for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to rest my eyes before getting back on the road. That is when time stopped making sense. I was sitting in that chair, staring at my phone, and 5 minutes felt like much longer. Much longer. The clock on the wall ticked forward, but my internal sense of time was completely disorienting. It felt like I was sitting there for an hour, maybe 2 hours, but when I looked up at the wall clock, only 5 minutes had passed. The pressure to leave was building inside me, that instinctual animal warning that something was fundamentally wrong with this place. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to get up and walk out the door, to get back to my truck, to get back on that highway and keep moving, but I could not move. I was frozen in that chair, staring at the clock, watching time pass in a way that made no sense. And that is when I realized the rest stop had changed. The vending machines on the walls were different now. I had not heard anyone approach them. I had not heard the sound of the doors opening. But their contents had shifted. The snack foods were gone. The sodas were gone. Instead, each machine was filled with something else. Photographs. Hundreds of photographs, arranged in neat rows behind the glass. And every photograph showed the same thing. A face. My face. But different versions of my face. My face at different ages. My face looking terrified. My face looking dead. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to do anything other than sit in that chair and stare at those horrifying images. But I could not move. The pressure to leave had become so intense, so suffocating, that it was physically paralyzing. It was like invisible hands were holding me down, pressing me into that plastic seat, forcing me to witness this impossible scene. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder. The sound became almost unbearable, like a swarm of angry wasps trapped inside the ceiling. I covered my ears, but the sound still pierced through. Everything in that room became oversaturated. The lights too bright, the silence too loud, the temperature dropping until I could see my breath clouding in front of my face. Time passed too quietly after that. The clock on the wall stopped ticking. The second hand froze in place. But I could feel time passing. I could feel it like a physical weight on my chest. Minutes stretched into something longer, something darker, something that did not follow the normal rules of reality. I forced myself to stand up. My legs were numb and unresponsive, but I pushed myself out of that chair using every ounce of strength I could muster. The moment I stood, the vending machines began to hum, a low, terrifying frequency that vibrated through the walls and floor. The sound was not mechanical. It was something else, something alive, something hungry. The rest stop around me began to shift and change. The walls became less solid. The fluorescent lights flickered and dimmed. The space itself was becoming unstable, like I was watching reality glitch around me. The photographs in the vending machines were moving now. My face was moving. Different versions of me were opening their mouths in silent screams. I ran for the door. My truck driver instinct kicked in. That survival mechanism that has carried me across millions of miles of American highway. I sprinted across that surreal space toward what I hoped was an exit. The humming grew louder. The lights flickered faster. The walls seemed to lean inward, threatening to collapse and crush me. I burst through the door and found myself not in a parking lot, but in a hallway. A long, endless hallway that stretched in both directions until it became shadow and darkness. The walls were white and featureless. The floor was concrete. The lights above were the same sickly fluorescent bulbs from the rest stop. And the hallway was filled with doors. Hundreds of doors. Thousands of doors. All identical. All closed. The creeping realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. I was not at a rest stop anymore. I had never been at a rest stop. This was something else entirely. This was a nightmare made solid. This was a place that existed outside of normal space and time. I started running down the hallway, trying doors at random. Locked. 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 Every single door was locked. Behind me, I could hear the humming growing louder. It was following me. The sound was hunting me down the corridor like something alive, like something that had marked me as its prey. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. Sweat was pouring down my face. My breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. This was pure fear. This was panic at the most primal level. This was the nightmare that every person who drives alone on American highways fears but never speaks about. The thought that you could disappear into one of those isolated rest stops and simply cease to exist. I came to a door that was different from the others. It was painted red. Bright, vivid red. The kind of red that looks like fresh blood. The humming was so loud now that I could barely think. It was screaming inside my skull. So I did the only thing I could do. I opened the red door. On the other side was my truck. But it was wrong. All wrong. The interior was stretched and distorted, like it had been warped by heat or some inexplicable force. The steering wheel was in the wrong position. The dashboard had symbols and markings I did not recognize. And in the driver's seat sat a figure. It was me. Another version of me. But this Marcus was ancient. His skin was gray and papery. His eyes were hollow and empty. His hands were skeletal, gripping the steering wheel with a grip that looked stronger than death itself. That haunting, terrifying figure turned its head toward me and I heard the sound. Not with my ears. Inside my mind. A voice that was mine but wrong. It spoke a single word. A word that contained infinite weight and meaning. A word that described every moment of horror and terror I had ever felt or would ever feel. Run. I ran. I did not know where I was running. I did not care. I burst away from that twisted version of my truck and kept moving. The hallway was changing now, shifting and reforming around me. The doors were multiplying. The walls were covered in something dark and wet. The fluorescent lights were breaking and shattering like glass. And then I felt a pull, a horrible, dragging sensation that was pulling me backward, like invisible rope tied around my waist, yanking me towards something unseen. I fought against it. I clawed at the ground. But I was moving backward regardless, pulled toward something waiting in the darkness behind me. The eerie silence returned. The pulling stopped. I found myself standing in a space between spaces. Not quite a hallway, not quite a room, just a void with the suggestion of walls and floor and ceiling. And in the center of this void stood a man in a dark suit. He did not look scary or demonic. He looked completely ordinary, the kind of man you would pass on the street without a second glance. But his eyes were old. So old. Ancient eyes in a young face. He was looking at me with an expression that could have been pity or hunger or something beyond human understanding. He told me something without speaking. I heard it directly in my mind. He told me that the rest stop was real. That it existed in a place where normal physics break down. That it existed in the spaces between the highway. In the darkness at the edge of consciousness. He told me that it was hungry. That it fed on travelers. That it had been feeding for decades. He told me something even more terrifying. He told me that I was not trapped. That I had never been trapped. That the entire experience was already part of my past. That I had been experiencing a memory of something that had already happened to me. That I had been in that rest stop before, and I would return there again. The figure reached toward me, and I felt the pressure building again. The horrifying, suffocating pressure to leave, that irresistible compulsion to escape. And suddenly I was moving, flying backward through the void at terrible speed. I crashed back into consciousness in my truck. I was sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, heart racing. The engine was running. I was parked in the rest stop parking lot, and the sun was setting. My timer on my phone showed that 5 minutes had passed. Only 5 minutes. But the sun position had changed. Hours had passed in the outside world while only minutes passed for me. I drove away from that place as fast as I could push the truck without risking a crash. I drove for the next 20 hours straight without stopping. I drove until I reached my delivery destination in Kansas City. I unloaded the freight and immediately told my dispatcher that I was taking a break. A long break, an indefinite break. For the past 2 weeks, I have not driven. I have not slept properly. I keep seeing that rest stop in my dreams. That hallway, that red door, that ancient version of myself sitting in the twisted driver's seat. But the scariest part, the thing that keeps me awake at night, is this. I have started researching other truck drivers, people who have disappeared on American highways, people who pulled into rest stops and never came out, and I have found literally hundreds of them, hundreds of names, hundreds of cases, all over America, some dating back decades, some as recent as last month. And yesterday, I made a mistake. I checked my phone GPS. I checked where I was when the 5 minutes passed. When I looked up the coordinates, I felt my blood turn to ice in my veins. That rest stop does not exist on any map. I drove past it, but there was nothing there. No building, no parking lot, nothing but empty highway and desert. My wife thinks I am losing my mind. Maybe I am, but I know the truth. That place is still out there. It is waiting, and I can feel it calling to me. Every time I think about getting back on the highway, I feel that pressure building. That demand that I return. That creeping, terrifying certainty that I left something behind in that rest stop. Tonight, I found something on my phone that was not there before. A photograph. It shows the interior of a rest stop, and sitting in one of the chairs is me. My exact position from that day. But the date stamp on the photo shows it was taken 3 days before I actually went there. I do not know what is happening to me. I do not know if I am alive or dead or something in between. But I know this much is true. If you are a truck driver, if you spend time on American highways, if you pull into those isolated rest stops in the middle of nowhere, be very careful, because you might not be alone, and the time you spend in that place might not be the same as the time passing in the real world. Time passed too quietly in that place, and I have never been able to find my way back to loud time since. Story 10. Stop. What would you do if you realized something invisible was watching you from inside your car? What if you could feel it there, breathing in the darkness, and you could not make it leave no matter how fast you drove? I am going to tell you what happened to me on Route 40, somewhere between Ohio and West Virginia, on a night that changed everything I understand about fear and reality. This is a true account. Every word is factual. What I experienced was not a nightmare I woke up from. I am still living with it. My name is David. I am a truck driver. I have been driving commercial routes for 23 years. I have spent more time on American highways than I have spent in my own home. I know the roads. I know the darkness between cities. I know the sound of my own engine at 3 in the morning when everything else on earth seems to have stopped moving. I thought I knew danger. I thought I understood isolation. I was wrong about all of it. That night, I was hauling automotive parts from Columbus to Charleston. It was a routine run, something I had done dozens of times. The autumn weather was turning rough, though. Dark clouds were moving in from the west, and the wind was picking up across the flat stretches of highway. My radio kept cutting out. I remember noticing that my phone signal was dropping in and out too, which was strange for a major interstate. Around 11 o'clock at night, I started feeling thirsty. My mouth had gone dry, and my stomach was hollow. I had been driving for nearly 9 hours straight. My eyes were starting to feel heavy in that creeping way that comes right before you do something stupid behind the wheel. I knew I needed to stop. I saw the gas station maybe a mile ahead. It was one of those scary, isolated rest stops that dot the highways in rural areas. Just a small building with harsh fluorescent lights, separated from the road by a wide, empty parking lot. The kind of place that makes you nervous the moment you see it. But I needed fuel and coffee, and I needed to move around for a few minutes. The parking lot was completely empty. No other vehicles, no people walking around, just me, my truck, and the dark sky pressing down from above. I pulled up to the pumps, killed my engine, and sat there for a moment in the silence. The wind was louder out here, making that creepy whistling sound it makes when it moves through metal structures. I got out of the cab and walked toward the station building. The glass doors were smudged and dirty. Inside, I could see fluorescent lights and rows of snacks. A cashier was visible behind the counter, a young woman with dark hair, staring down at something in front of her. She did not look up as I approached. The automatic doors slid open with a hollow hiss. Inside, the air felt wrong. It was too warm, and there was a smell like old coffee and something else underneath it. Something organic and faintly disturbing. The store was arranged in that familiar way, with aisles of candy and energy drinks and magazines. The refrigerated section hummed loudly against the far wall. I walked to the coffee station and poured myself a cup. My hands were shaking slightly. I did not understand why. There was nothing scary about a gas station. It was lit and warm and normal. Yet I felt something was off about this place. The air seemed thick. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, bleaching all the color out of everything. The young woman at the counter still had not moved. She was staring at the register, her face completely blank. I wondered if she was okay. She seemed frozen. I selected some beef jerky and a bag of pretzels from the shelves, grabbed my coffee, and walked toward the register. As I approached, the young woman finally looked up at me. Her eyes were unfocused. She looked through me more than at me. Her expression did not change as I placed my items on the counter. That was when I noticed something odd. Her name tag said Angela, but there was something wrong with the photograph on it. The photo was too dark. I could barely make out a face at all. It just looked like a black shape with a vague suggestion of features. She rang up my items without saying anything. When she told me the total, her voice was flat and emotionless. I gave her cash and waited for change. She handed it to me very slowly, and her fingers felt cold when they brushed against my palm. That small contact made my skin crawl. I took the change in my bag and turned toward the door. As I walked away, I felt her eyes on my back. I did not turn around to confirm it. I just wanted out of that building. Back at my truck, I pumped fuel and sat in the cab for a few minutes, drinking my coffee. The coffee tasted like it was days old, bitter and metallic on my tongue. I threw it out the window and decided to skip it. I was about to restart the engine when I noticed something. In the side mirror, I could see the station building. The glass doors were still visible from where I sat, and I could see Angela standing just inside the doors, her face pressed against the glass, staring directly at my truck. She had not moved to the window. She was simply there, watching. I looked away and started the engine. I did not look back at the building again as I pulled out of the parking lot and merged back onto Route 40. The darkness swallowed me immediately. The highway at that late hour was completely deserted. My headlights cut through the black, illuminating only the road ahead. The wind was stronger now, pushing against the side of my truck. I could hear it howling around the cab. The trees on both sides of the road were barely visible, just dark shapes that seemed to lean toward the pavement. I was about 5 miles from the station when I first felt it. It was not an audible sound. It was more like a pressure change in the cab, a subtle shift in the air. The kind of feeling you get when someone steps into a room behind you, even before you turn around to look. That creepy sensation of not being alone. I adjusted my mirror and looked at the passenger seat. It was empty. Of course it was empty. There was nobody in my truck but me. I was alone in a cab driving through the darkness of rural Ohio, 60 miles per hour, heading toward West Virginia. But the feeling did not go away. It stayed, riding quietly in the passenger seat. I kept my eyes on the road and tried to ignore it. I told myself it was paranoia. It was the late hour and the isolated road and the creepy gas station. My mind was playing tricks on me. Drivers get strange thoughts sometimes after hours on the highway. It is just the exhaustion and the monotony and the darkness working on your brain. I turned on the radio. A country station came through, crackling with static. I kept it on for the distraction. 10 miles down the road, I felt a shift in the atmosphere again. The temperature in the cab seemed to have dropped. I could see my breath becoming visible in the air ahead of my face. That should not have been happening. The heater was on. The cab was warm only moments ago. I increased the heat setting. Nothing changed. If anything, it got colder. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. My jaw clenched. That familiar feeling of dread was building in my chest. The kind of fear that comes from something you cannot see or touch or identify. The primal fear of the unknown. The highway continued through darkness. No other vehicles passed me. No lights from houses or towns. Just endless black road and darker woods and the horrible feeling that something was wrong with the air inside my truck. I thought about turning around, going back to the station, getting off the highway at the next exit and finding a different route. But none of that made sense. I was a professional driver. I had been on thousands of dark highways. This was normal. This was just the job. Except it was not normal. Around mile marker 87, something happened that made my blood freeze. I was adjusting my grip on the steering wheel when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Just a flicker of something in the passenger seat. I snapped my head to look, but there was nothing there. The seat was empty. The window beside it was dark with the reflection of the highway in my headlights. But I could have sworn I saw something move. The radio suddenly lost its signal and filled with white noise. Pure static. I stabbed at the buttons to find another station, but every frequency was just static now. Loud, hissing, disturbing static that seemed to fill the cab. I turned it off. The silence that followed was worse. The only sounds were my engine and the wind and the peculiar absence of anything normal. It was the kind of silence that made me aware of every breath I took, every beat of my heart. That was when I heard it. A sound that did not belong. A wet, sliding sound coming from somewhere behind me. Like something heavy being dragged across the floor of the cargo bed. Like something organic moving through fluid. I checked my mirrors. Nothing. The cargo bed was empty except for the secured load of automotive parts. Nothing was moving back there. Nothing could be moving back there. But the sound continued. That horrible, wet, dragging sound. Coming closer. I pressed down on the accelerator. The truck responded, pushing from 60 to 70 miles per hour. The sound kept pace with me. If anything, it seemed to be moving faster, as if whatever was making that noise was now pursuing me. I was breathing hard. My palms were sweating on the wheel. Every instinct was screaming at me that something was terribly wrong. This was not paranoia anymore. This was real. Something was in my truck. 75 miles per hour. 80. The highway was a blur of asphalt and lines. The wet dragging sound stopped. I waited for it to resume, but it did not. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the noise, because now I did not know where it was. It could be anywhere, anywhere in my truck. That was when the cab temperature dropped again, this time drastically. It went from merely cold to genuinely freezing in what felt like seconds. My breath was visible now, a cloud of white that hung in front of my face. I could see frost beginning to form on the inside of the windshield. I turned up the heat all the way. No effect. The cold continued to deepen. And then I heard it again. Not from behind me this time. From beside me. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing coming from the passenger seat. The sound of something with lungs, inhaling and exhaling in a rhythm that seemed almost human but was subtly wrong. The breathing was too shallow, too quick. The exhalation was too prolonged. I did not look. I could not make myself look. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, but every muscle in my body was rigid with terror. The breathing continued, in and out, getting slightly closer with each breath. I could feel the presence of something there in the seat beside me. Something that was definitely not alone. I swerved the truck suddenly, yanking the wheel hard to the right. I wanted it to look in that direction, to confront whatever was in the passenger seat, but I could not turn my head. The fear had paralyzed my neck, my shoulders, my entire body. The truck wobbled on the highway, nearly hydroplaning on the pavement. I corrected the wheel and straightened out again. The breathing stopped. The sudden silence was absolute. Not even wind noise, not even my own heartbeat. Just complete and total quiet. I looked. I had to look. The passenger seat was empty. Just dark fabric and the shadow of the seat back. Nothing else. No shape, no sign that anything had ever been there. But I could smell it now. The smell was like the gas station had been. That organic stench I had noticed before. But stronger now. Much stronger. Like something dead and rotting. But also like earth and copper and something else I could not identify. That was when I decided I had to get off the highway. The next exit was coming up, maybe 2 miles ahead. I could see the green sign in my headlights. A small town, Shelbyville, a place with lights and buildings and other people. I took the exit at a dangerous speed, the truck tilting as I turned the wheel. The cargo shifted in the bed behind me. Boxes fell, loose parts scattered across the metal floor. The exit ramp deposited me on a smaller road that curved through more darkness before eventually feeding into the main street of the town. Shelbyville was the kind of small American town that exists in the gaps between major cities. Empty storefronts, a few streetlights casting weak yellow circles on the pavement, a traffic light that was blinking red because nobody was around and needed to be working properly. I pulled up to a motel on the edge of town, the Scenic Inn, a single-story building arranged in an L shape with a small office at the corner. Half the room lights were off. The neon sign was flickering. It looked like the kind of place where people did not stay by choice. But I needed to get out of my truck. I needed to be around other people. I parked in front of the office and sat there for a moment, gathering my thoughts. My hands were still shaking. My breathing was coming in short bursts. I felt like I was losing my mind. I got out of the cab. The night air was cold and still. No wind anymore, just the oppressive silence of a small town in the middle of the night. Inside the office, a bored-looking man was watching a small television. He looked up at me with the vague irritation of someone being interrupted. I asked him for a room. He did not ask any questions. He handed me a key to room 12 and told me it would be $60 for the night. I paid him cash and took the key. Room 12 was a standard motel room. Twin beds with beige comforters, a television on a metal stand, a bathroom with a shower, a window that looked out onto the parking lot in my truck. I closed the door and locked it. Then I locked it again, checking the deadbolt twice. The shaking gradually subsided. My heartbeat slowed to something approaching normal. I sat on the edge of one of the beds and tried to process what had happened. It was not real. It could not have been real. I had experienced some kind of episode. Too much time on the road, exhaustion and stress creating hallucinations and paranoia. The mind is capable of creating incredibly convincing illusions when it is under duress. That was the only logical explanation. I lay down on the bed fully clothed and tried to sleep. It did not come. I lay in the darkness, listening to the sound of the motel, the distant hum of an ice machine down the hallway, the occasional car passing on the highway beyond town. Sometime after 2 a.m, I heard something outside my window. A sound that made every hair on my body stand straight up. It was the sound of my truck door opening. I jumped up and ran to the window. I looked out into the parking lot. My truck was there, silent and dark. The driver's side door was hanging open. I could not see anyone near it. No one was visible in the parking lot or on the street. But that door was definitely open. I threw on my shoes and ran outside. The parking lot was cold and empty. My truck sat under the weak light of a distant street lamp. The driver's side door swung gently back and forth in the breeze. I approached it slowly. Every part of my mind was screaming at me to run, to get away, to never get back into that truck. But I had to know. I had to see. The cab was empty. Nothing had been disturbed. My keys were still in the ignition where I had left them. But there was something on the passenger seat. A single black feather, long and glossy and completely out of place in the cab of a truck parked in a motel lot in the middle of Shelbyville, Ohio. I reached in and grabbed the feather. It was real and solid in my hand. Still warm. That was when I heard the breathing again. Right behind me, that same slow, deliberate breathing. Too close. I could feel the presence of something standing directly behind me in the darkness. I spun around. There was nothing there, but the breathing continued. I could hear it all around me now, coming from the darkness in multiple directions, multiple sources. I ran back into my motel room and locked the door again. I pushed a chair against it for added security. I turned on every light in the room and climbed onto one of the beds, pulling my feet up beneath me like a frightened child. I stayed like that until dawn broke. With the first light of morning, everything was normal again. The breathing had stopped sometime in the night. The presence had gone. When I looked out the window, the parking lot was empty except for my truck, the door now closed. I checked the seat where the feather had been. It was gone. I left Shelbyville without checking out. I simply got in my truck and drove. I made it to Charleston and completed my delivery. I called my dispatcher and told him I needed a week off. He did not ask questions. For the first few days, I tried to convince myself that the experience was a delusion, some kind of stress-induced breakdown. But as the days passed, I realized something terrifying. The feeling did not disappear. I went to the grocery store, and I felt it. In the back seat of my car. I went to dinner with a friend, and I felt it. Under the table. I went to sleep in my own bed, and I felt it. Standing at the foot of the bed, whatever I encountered on Route 40, whatever was in that gas station and then in my truck, it had followed me home. It had gotten inside something more than just my vehicle. It had gotten inside me. Or perhaps it had never left my vehicle at all. Perhaps it was still there, still riding quietly in the passenger seat, hidden in some space between moments that I cannot perceive. 2 weeks after that night, I tried to go back to my job. I got into my truck, an older Ford I had been using for maintenance hauls, and I drove back toward Ohio. I was determined to face this. I was going to return to that gas station. I was going to find answers. I never made it there. Something happened on Route 40, maybe a mile from that station, that I still cannot fully explain or remember. I remember the headlights cutting through darkness. I remember a feeling of pressure building in my chest. I remember seeing something massive and dark in the road ahead, something that my brain could not fully process or categorize. And then I remember waking up in my truck, parked on the shoulder of the highway, with no memory of how I got there. 3 hours had passed. My dashboard clock showed it clearly. 3 hours missing from my life. The passenger seat was wet with something dark, wet and reeking of that same organic stench. I drove that truck back to my company and refused to ever get back in it. I told my supervisor it was mechanical problems. He did not press the issue. They parked it in the lot and never used it again. I have not been able to go back on Route 40 since that night. I have not been able to function as a truck driver at all. Every vehicle I get into carries that presence with it now. That feeling of something watching, something waiting, something that is not quite human riding along in the darkness with me. I left the job. I tried working other routes, even leaving trucks altogether and finding work in warehouses. The presence remained. It is always there. Sometimes it is distant, just a vague pressure in the air. Sometimes it is so close I can almost feel the weight of it against my shoulder. I have been to 5 different therapists. They have given me diagnoses: anxiety disorder, PTSD, dissociative episodes, sleep disturbance. They have prescribed medications. Nothing helps, because this is not a psychological condition. This is real. The thing that happened on Route 40 was real. And whatever that was, it is still with me. Sometimes I wonder if the young woman at the gas station had once been a normal person too. If she had once been like me. Just someone passing through, stopping for coffee and fuel, and something had happened to her there. Something that had changed her into whatever she had become. A hollow thing, a shell, something that other people could sense was wrong but could not quite identify. I think there are many places like that gas station in America. Old rest stops and forgotten buildings and isolated highways where something has taken root. Things that prey on people who pass through, that follow them home, that ride quietly beside them in the darkness. I think about the other drivers I saw on Route 40 that night, the ones I passed in the early morning hours. I wonder if they felt it too. I wonder if they are also still carrying it with them, this invisible passenger that never quite leaves. And I think about you, the person listening to this. I think about the fact that these places exist in your country. On roads you have probably driven. In towns you may have passed through. And I think about the possibility that something could happen to you the way it happened to me. That something could get into your car. That it could follow you home. That it could ride quietly in the passenger seat of every vehicle you ever enter for the rest of your life. That is the terrifying truth I have lived with since that night on Route 40. That is the chilling reality that no amount of therapy or medication can erase. The creepy, unsettling knowledge that what I experienced was not isolated. It was not a unique nightmare. It was just a glimpse of something that is always happening. Something that is happening right now, on highways and in rest stops across America. Something dark and hungry and patient, riding beside people, waiting for the moment when the light goes out. The feeling that stayed with me in that cab never truly left. And I do not believe it ever will. These stories don't end when the video ends. They connect to the next night, and the one after that. Midnight Whispers Stories is a collection of quiet places people never forgot. Gas stations, rest stops, roads, towns, the kind you remember long after you leave. If you listen at night, if silence makes you uncomfortable, if these stories feel too real, subscribe now. Because the next place we stop might feel even closer to home.